All right. Can you hear me? Welcome. Welcome. Test. Yes, welcome. Hello. Hello, welcome. Please come on in, find a seat. Welcome. Come on in. There are plenty of seats. There will be time for coffee, etc. later. Joseph, Mr. Suzanka, can you hear me back there? All right. Welcome. Let's go ahead and begin with a quick prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end, amen. Our Lady, seat of wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. All right, welcome very much to our sixth and final lecture in this academic year's lecture series at Wyoming Catholic College. If I don't already know you, I'm thrilled that you're here. Please introduce yourself to one of us afterwards. You're most welcome. There will be a reception right here afterwards, so you don't have to go find the wine and cheese, and we can continue the conversation as long as we can get Mr. Alquist to stay with us. So. I get to abuse my prerogative as the dean and give a short lecture before the lecture. So I'm going to do that now before I introduce our lecture coordinator who will actually introduce the speaker this evening. I was thinking about memory in anticipation of this lecture because many years ago something strange happened to me. I read a book by a wonderful author named G.K. Chesterton, who our speaker will tell us about some tonight. And a shocking thing happened. It's not shocking that I read the book. What's shocking is that I paid attention to it. And I remembered some of it. And later on, it shaped the way I thought about the world. It changed the way I thought about some important things, and it stayed with me. That doesn't always happen when we read books, does it? You've probably already had the experience where you know you read something, but you can't really remember what happened to you, right, students? Okay, so a word about memory. I just want to say a word about memory. We don't really notice our memory typically until it doesn't work, right? It works all the time, and so we don't pay attention to it, but every once in a while it doesn't work, and then we say, I've got a bad memory. What do we mean by that, right? You can make an analogy. A memory is sort of like a filing cabinet, right? And you put things into, if you don't, students know what a filing cabinet is. It's this thing we used to have. I actually don't have one either, but it's like a box. It's a drawer you put papers into, and presumably you come back later and you get them out of the drawer, right? So anyway, think of it like an email inbox or something, but things are organized. That's the idea, right? So a filing cabinet is kind of like your memory. You put things into it, and then later on, right, you want to come back and get the thing out of the filing cabinet. Right? And you don't pay attention to your filing cabinet until it doesn't work. And then you say, I have a bad memory. Right? Why doesn't it work? Well, there are a lot of reasons why a filing cabinet maybe doesn't work. And there's analogies. There's an analogous situation in every case with our memory, right? Sometimes you go to your filing cabinet and the thing's actually in the filing cabinet, you just can't find it in the filing cabinet. It's actually there, but you can't find it. Maybe your filing cabinet is not organized very well, right? We can have memories that are like that. Somehow the memory is inside of us, but we can't find it, right? So that's one thing that can happen. Another thing that can happen is maybe the memory is in the right place, but for some reason you can't access it, right? Another thing is maybe it's in the right place, but it's been corrupted, and so you can access it, but you don't get back what you wanted, right? Another thing that could happen is maybe someone's come along in the interim and stolen the paper out of your filing cabinet. And you're sure you put it in there, but when you go to find it, it's not there. It's actually not there at all. There's nothing you could do to find it at this point, right? But of course, another thing that can happen is you just didn't put the thing in the filing cabinet and you thought you did. Okay? But there's an interesting problem with our memory, which is like filing cabinets. When you go to remember something and you don't remember it, you don't actually know why you didn't remember it. You just know you can't find it. Okay? So there's all these different reasons why our memories cannot work, and we never know why they don't work. We just have the experience of them not working. Okay, so it turns out that some very clever people have done extensive research to figure out why is it that our memories don't work most often. And of course, the reasons are complex. There's different reasons. But here's the number one reason why our memories don't work. Okay? Far and away, the greatest cause of our memory system, our filing cabinet not working, is because we never put things into our filing cabinet in the first place. Okay? We never put things into our memories in the first place. That is to say, we don't so much have a memory problem. If you think you have a memory problem, chances are you don't have a memory problem. You have an attention problem. You're not putting things into your filing cabinet. Okay? So how do you remember things so that you'll remember them later, so that you'll have them later? One more image, okay? We have to attend to things. That's what happened to me in that Chesterton book. So for some reason, praise God, I paid attention to this book, right? I really gave it attention. Okay, one more image. Students, imagine you're walking down a trail, you're backpacking, and in 100 yards, you step over maybe 1,000 boulders, right? You've all done this many, many times, right? You see a sharp rock, and then a moment later, you shift your weight, you step around it, right? You do it again 1,000 times in 100 yards, say, okay? And you do this for maybe 5 hours a day, right, on a backpacking trip. Okay. Of course, at the end of the day, you forget all of those rocks. But notice something happened, right? There was a moment where you were remembering the rocks because you had to look at them and a moment later step around them. A moment later, you had to shift your weight to get around them. So that already was something like your memory working, wasn't it? Okay. So the point of this image, what I want you to notice about this is that we're really good at remembering things, but we're far better at not remembering things, okay? The vast majority of the time when things come to our senses, even when we're attending to them, even when we're acting upon them, our brain says, that's not worth remembering, right? For the good reason that if we remembered all of those rocks on the trail 10 years, 50 years later, we would go insane, right? It's not good to remember all those things. So what do you do if you want to remember the rocks? What do you do if you want this lecture to not be a couple of rocks that you pass by and then never think of again? That's what I'm getting at, right? Okay. Well, you have to attend to it, okay? And then here's the magic key, the last thing I want to say. If you want to remember something, your brain has an incredible mechanism for you telling it that you want to remember something, okay? If you want to tell your brain to remember something, what you do is you try to remember it. It sounds really simple, right? Your brain decides to remember things that you try to remember, okay? And you don't try to remember the rocks. So as the lecture is happening tonight, what I would encourage you to do is listen and attend to it, but then most of all, try to remember, as it's happening, what happened, right? And I hope if you do that, you also will be blessed with the wisdom of G.K. Chesterton for many, many years to come. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our lecture coordinator, who will actually introduce Mr. Alquist. Okay, a brief note about that. We all just get to enjoy the lectures, right? And we've had a wonderful lecture series this year, but there's a lot you don't see that goes on behind the scene, right? There are many potential lecturers that we have to cull from and choose to extend invitations to the very best, right? There's a lot of communication that has to happen. There's a lot of coordination with travel and various other arrangements. And that doesn't just take care of itself. That happens because we have someone in particular who's doing a lot of work, who's been doing a lot of work both this year and will next year to make this lecture series happen. So as I welcome our lecture coordinator up to the stage, would you also help me in thanking Dr. Pavlos Papadopoulos?
Thank you, Dr. Olson, for that memorable lecture. You need to do the work now of remembering the thing he just told you about how to remember. That's correct, right? I usually remember by talking about things. So the one thing I would add to that wonderful introduction is just a second exhortation to drink wine and eat cheese, and in between bites, politely discourse with your neighbor, because certainly in my case, talking about something that I've read, talking about something that I've heard, helps me do that work of reinforcing the attention. Thank you also for the mention of the work that goes into the lecture series, and the only reason I'm dwelling on it now is because I've had myself a lot of help, and in particular, Dr. Preble this year really stepped up and helped me with some of these logistics. So thank you, Dr. Preble. I know you're in here somewhere, but thank you for helping make this lecture possible as well. And thank you to the Free Church for hosting us this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. Mr. Dale Ahlquist is president of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. He is the creator and host of the EWTN series G.K. Chesterton, the Apostle of Common Sense, and he is the editor and publisher of Gilbert Magazine. He's the author of 6 books and editor of 16 books, including the new annotated edition of Chesterton's The Everlasting Man. His hundreds of speeches and published articles have won him recognition as probably the greatest living authority on the life and work of G.K. Chesterton. He's also the co-founder of Chesterton Academy, a top-rated Catholic classical high school in Minnesota, the flagship of the growing Chesterton Schools Network, which now includes over 60 schools in 24 states and 10 other countries. It's our great honor and pleasure to have President Ahlquist with us here tonight for his lecture, so please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you, Dr. Pavlos. Bella Leonard. Where are you, Bella? Come up here, darling. Up here, next to me, on the stage. You didn't know that you were going to be introduced, did you? See, they didn't tell the audience that Pavlos was going to introduce me and I was going to introduce you. I'm very pleased to meet you.
Are you Kate's friend?
Am I Kate's friend?
Yeah.
What's that got to do with anything?
Sorry. Oh, well, Kate told me she knew you, so. Wagner?
Kate
Wagner?
Kate Wagner?
Mm-hmm.
Would Kate Wagner be the one who asked me to return your water bottle to you?
Is that all?
Subject of tonight's talk is chivalry. Returning a water bottle to someone from 1,500 miles away, someone that you don't even know. Well, do I need to talk about chivalry anymore? I think we're done here. Yes, I do know Kate Wagner. She's a graduate of the Chesterton Academy in the Twin Cities, the one that I helped get started. And then she's a graduate of Wyoming Catholic College, and now she's back at Chesterton Academy teaching for us. Is that great or what? Yeah, why would you forget your water bottle? Anyway, we're talking about memory tonight, there are these two older couples, and one couple was visiting the other, and the two women went into the kitchen, and the two gentlemen were sitting in the living room talking, and the one says to the other, We went to the best restaurant the other night. It was just great, really good food, wasn't expensive, nice atmosphere. Just, it had everything going for it. It's just really great. And the other one says, what was the name of it? He goes, what? What was the name of the restaurant? It was, what was it? It was, the name of the restaurant, it was, okay, what are those flowers, the red flowers with the thorns on the stem? Rose? Yeah, Rose. Rose! What was the name of that restaurant we went to? So Dr. Virginia apologized to me that she wouldn't be at the lecture here tonight, and I apologize to her for what I'm about to say about her. So I stumbled into her ethics class yesterday, and she jumped up with just a squeal of recognition when she saw me, and then the smile disappeared from her face as she had realized that she had no idea who I was. And ironically, the topic that they were discussing was courtesy. And I really did enjoy listening to the discussion. The students, you guys did a terrific job. You were articulate and confident, and we're just drawing great things from the text that you were considering, and I was deeply impressed. But I think the thing that struck me the most was the many, many lost opportunities to quote Chesterton as you discussed each item. But I had to, sit still. I was just a visitor, and the topic was courtesy after all. But you were talking about courtesy, and I thought, well, you should bring up Chesterton's book on St. Francis, where he talks about St. Francis was known for his courtesy, and the very word courtesy has inside of it the word court. In other words, courtesy is courtly behavior, not the court of law or the court of tennis or basketball, but the court of a king. And Chesterton says courtesy is literally treating everyone as if they are a king. And then, of course, that would have been a great opportunity to bring that up, and I was just shocked that no one did. And then the term courtesy is in the word courting, and it was brought up about what a gentleman goes through in courting a woman, and someone pointed out a difference from the caveman style of courting. And some other students were wondering what that meant, and it's a reference to the old cartoons of the caveman hitting the cave woman over the head with a club and dragging her to his cave by her hair, and it's sort of a less romantic view of courting. But it was what people thought. People really were trained to think that that's the way primitive people did the whole love thing. And Chesterton points out in his book, The Everlasting Man, that there's absolutely zero evidence that ever happened. That's based on pure speculation. There's not a shred of evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Early Caveman had such a ritual. In fact, the only thing we know about their behavior, there's only one thing we know about their behavior, and that's that they were artists. We still have the paintings on the walls of the cave to prove that that's what they did. They were artists. That's the human thing that they did. It's what set them apart from the beasts. Chesterton says art is the signature of man. And then we talked about how limits make you free. And I said, okay, they're going to quote Chesterton now for sure. How Chesterton says that Catherine, doctrine, and discipline may be walls, but they're the walls of a playground. And within those limits, we are entirely free. And yet no one did it. And then someone else talked about how we need courtesy because everyone is an obstacle. Kind of a low view of mankind, but I think he was complaining about the fact that everything seems to be inconvenient. And of course, the Chesterton line, which I was waiting for him to say, was that an inconvenience is only an adventure, wrongly considered, whereas an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. When you spent your 3 weeks in the mountains, it was extremely inconvenient. But you weren't thinking of it that way. You were realizing that you were on a great adventure because you had the right attitude. And that's the same attitude you should have in a traffic jam in Seattle, is that this is a great adventure. And someday I will slay each of these dragons. And then gratitude came up, and I was, of course, waiting for someone to say Chesterton's line that thanks is the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is, you said gratitude is something where you need another person. And Chesterton's line, again from the St. Francis book, that the worst moment for an atheist is when he's thankful and has no one to thank. Well, all these points do set us up for tonight's topic. So you just had to sit through one more introduction right now. Chivalry. G.K. Chesterton talked about chivalry. In fact, he said that he was the politest man in all of England because he could stand up on a bus and offer his seat to 3 women at one time. But I did a little looking up about what Chesterton writes about chivalry, and it's fascinating. He really puts it together, and he's, as he is in every topic, totally consistent across a writing career of over 35 years. So that what he says at the beginning of his writing career really matches up nicely with what he says at the end. He's sort of like Athena, that emerged fully formed from the head of Zeus. Chesterton was fully formed in many ways when he started his career as a writer. The thing he says about chivalry is that it is not an obvious idea. Chivalry is not an obvious idea. In fact, he says it's difficult to define. He defines it many different ways. He defines it as a reverence for weakness, or he defines it as Christian courage, a disdain of death, the moral attitude of a man with his back to the wall. He says, for the Catholic faith is always mixed up with the mystery of freedom, and love is always mixed up with the mystery of chivalry. And if you think about it, both faith and love are mixed up with the ideas of freedom and of chivalry. Every culture has to have a conception of life that makes it possible to live. But Chesterton says that Christendom has done infinitely more than other cultures. It has more of the idea of free will, more of the idea of a personal chivalry and charity, and more of the clean wind of hope. And he says that the paradox of chivalry or charity is that the weaker the thing is, the more it should be respected. That the more indefensible a thing is, the more it should appeal to us for a certain kind of defense. That's why we defend the unborn, for instance. But it's also especially why there's a special courtesy in chivalry that is extended to women. The damsel in distress, which of course brings up St. George, patron saint of England, whose day was, 2 days ago? It was also Shakespeare's birthday, wasn't it? April 23rd. Also the day that Shakespeare died on April 23rd. April 23rd, big day. St. George, What do we know about St. George? Nothing. We don't know anything at all about him. That's one of the great things about having a saint like St. George to be your patron saint. Originally, he's known as a early Roman martyr, but somehow he turns into a knight who defeats a dragon in order to save a princess. That became his big story. Well, Chesterton says there's a reason for that. Because he says every romance has three characters: St. George, the princess, and the dragon. Those three characters are in every romance. The princess is the thing to be loved. The dragon is the thing to be fought. And St. George is the thing that loves and fights. And loving without fighting is simply lust. And fighting without loving is simply a dangerous form of horseplay that is occasionally fatal. Well, like two people laughed. That's good. So it's good. Just there's three people awake out there. I still might say something worthwhile. So the rest of you should still be paying attention. If you don't learn it, you're not going to remember it. But Chesterton's point about chivalry, even though he says every romance has those three characters, he says that chivalry is not romantic. It's actually realistic. It's the only realistic view of the sexes. He says St. George was probably more afraid of the princess than he was of the dragon. He says romance always consists of love and war, as does human life for all those wild people who prefer to love it. And these are the plain marks of the fighter: laughter, chivalry, and a contempt for anything cruel. Wherever there's chivalry, there's courtesy. And wherever there's courtesy, there's comedy. That's why the fighter is always ready to laugh. And that's why the lover is already ready to laugh. We always are able to laugh when we don't take ourselves too seriously. Angels fly because they take themselves lightly. Now, Chesterton says there's no better test of a man's ultimate chivalry and integrity than how he behaves when he's wrong. And one of the first people who behaved badly when they were wrong is one of the first people. Chesterton says, Adam, after the fall, loses his chivalry in a rather marked and startling manner. After all, he abandons not only God, but he abandons his lady in the same moment. And the rest of the story of mankind has been to try to gain those two things back, the two things that were lost at that moment. Not only the love of God, but the proper love of a woman. And we had to have a new Adam and a new Eve in order to achieve that. We had to have the Blessed Virgin Mary. And Chesterton points out that at the beginning of the Middle Ages, really even at the end of the Dark Ages, this growing devotion to Our Lady was what led to a higher respect for womanhood that went by the name of chivalry. And of course, it was connected to the rise of the most famous of all kings of England, the one who somehow escaped the English history books, but who exists in legend, King Arthur and his knights, all great examples of chivalry. And Chesterton's argument that Arthur was a real person because legend is something that is reliable. Legend, he says, is what everyone in the village believes, whereas history is what one person in the village believes who happens to have written it down. And he's probably a crank. And so he said we can actually rely on legend as telling us something that really happened. And his argument for the existence of a real King Arthur went against all scholarship at the time he wrote that in the early 20th century. But one person read that book, which was The Short History of England, and said, I'm going to find the real King Arthur. And that was a man by the name of Geoffrey Ashe, just passed away a few years ago, who did a bunch of research that not only found all the evidence that King Arthur really existed, but even found Arthur's grave. It found evidence that his bones were in the monastery at St. Glastonbury and were disposed of by King Henry's men when they destroyed the monastery. They destroyed King Arthur's bones. But Chesterton's main argument was that Arthur was so far back in history because it was before the recorded history. That's what the Dark Ages were. The Dark Ages refer to the fact there's very little recorded during that time. And he says if you go far enough back in history, you get to the dawn of the light of the previous day. He said he clearly was someone who came from Rome and brought Roman civilization with him when he came to England. And that's who Arthur was. And that's pretty much what Geoffrey Ashe's research confirmed. And he was actually decorated by Queen Elizabeth for his work in contributing to English culture because of his discovery of the real Arthur. But yeah, what we get from the legend of the knights, the chivalry of the knights, is that they were following a standard that wasn't English but was something above England. It was a standard outside of historical time, an eternal standard, a standard that comes from paradise itself. And knighthood, says Chesterton, originally was a title given to a man to further spur him in honor and bravery and chivalry. And chivalry is literally and completely forgotten by modern knights. The knighthood in our time is not as a rule given to a man before, but rather after he is fortunate. The whole point of knighthood was that the knight should arrive late, but not too late. Had St. George not been late, there would have been no story. Had he been too late, there would have been no princess. Do you know what the term ESQ period means after someone's name? Yeah, but what does that mean? What am I doing under here? It means nothing at all in the modern terms. It's just added as it doesn't mean anything anymore. But yeah, when you said esquire, that's what it referred to someone who hadn't earned their spurs yet, okay? I'm going to read to you from The Everlasting Man, from the new annotated version that I created and did a commentary for it. And I'm going to donate this book to the Chesterton Reading Room at the end of this evening, if we ever get to the end of this evening. Yeah, going to read from it right now. All right. Okay. That isn't it. Okay. Out of some dark forest, under some ancient dawn, there must come towards us the lumbering yet dancing motions, one of the very queerest of all the prehistoric creatures. We must see for the first time the strangely small head set on a neck not only longer but thicker than itself, as the face of a gargoyle is thrust out upon a gutter spout, the one disproportionate crest of hair running along the ridge of that heavy neck like a beard in the wrong place, the feet, each like a solid club of horn, alone amid the feet of so many cattle, so that the true fear is to be found in showing not only the cloven but the uncloven hoof. What's he describing? Who said horse? Not too many. What were the other ones? What'd you say? That wasn't a horse. Who said something other than a horse? Shark? Yeah, it is a horse, but only 4 of you held up your hands. Of course, you've all read the book before, so you're a bunch of cheaters. So the point is, when I read this passage to the Chesterton seniors, every 2 or 3 years, someone gets it right, guesses a horse. But they guess all kinds of other creatures. The whole point is that Chesterton is describing a horse exactly, but how do you describe a horse to someone who's never seen a horse? And the creature he's describing does fit that description. If we had to describe a horse to someone, we'd already refer to the fact that they've already seen a horse, and we'd use all these familiar images. And Chesterton's whole point in The Everlasting Man is that everyone thinks they understand Christianity, and they don't. They've only know the part that they've seen, and they've either reacted to it well or badly, but they haven't really seen all of it. They haven't backed up and looked at the whole horse. They haven't backed up and looked at the whole faith, as the strange thing it is. But the whole point, it all starts in this book about first the history of man and then the history of the world with a horse. It starts with a horse. And the horse is part of chivalry. Chivalry is a horsey thing. Charging, swift, meaning that a man took his swiftest horse, whether to murder his enemy or forgive his enemy or to ask forgiveness of his enemy. And you, here at Wyoming Catholic, you guys do horses. You do chivalry probably better than just about any college in the country because you study horses firsthand, up close and personal. He says the very name of horse has been lifted up along with the name of man in the wildest fashion, in the very word that we use when we speak chivalry. The very name of horse has been given to the highest mood and moment of man. So we might almost say that the handsomest compliment of a man is to call him a horse. And chivalry is also associated with civilization itself. And the alternatives to civilization is not paganism, because paganism was very civilized. It's barbarism. The barbarian is the enemy of civilization, willfully at war with the principles by which human society has made possible hitherto. The man who cannot love, no, nor even hate his neighbor as himself. The man who does not believe in chivalry, in war or charity, in peace, above all, he who does not believe in modesty in anything. Whatever he does, he overdoes. Barbarians live by appetite. And certainly all the economic theories of the modern world are based purely on appetite, on the struggle for bread. They are utterly godless and utterly uncivilized. They're beastly. And Chesterton writes about the barbarians in his epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse. But he even, and of course, that's about a horse. He even shows a respect from the barbarians from the north, the Vikings, my people. He describes them as huge, hairy men. They were as trees walking the earth, as witless and as tall. That's the front line of the Minnesota Vikings right there. The Northmen came about our land, a Christless chivalry, who knew not of the arch or pen, great, beautiful, half-witted men from the sunrise and the sea. They came with a Christless chivalry, so they did come on horses, these barbarians. But they didn't know of the arch, they didn't know of architecture, and they didn't know of writing. And that's who Alfred has to fight off in order to save civilization and to save Christendom in England. And then, of course, there's another great epic poem by Chesterton that involves chivalry. And where's the Canadian contingency? Where are you seated this evening? Which one of you was going to come up here and recite the... Yes, it was you, wasn't it? You were going to come up and recite the stanza from Lepanto? Isn't this great? I've got a microphone here. Look, right here. Use the microphone. And introduce yourselves.
All right. Well, I am Catherine Zidlowski.
And I am Noah Sauer.
And you are invaders from the Northland.
Well, I am, yes.
Okay, you are. All right.
Yes.
So they're gonna recite just one stanza from Lepanto, the stanza at the very end of the poem. After the battle has been fought, after Don Juan of Austria, the great knight, has defeated the Turks, then there's this strange epilogue to the rest of the poem. Okay.
Cervantes, on his galley, sets the sword back in the sheath.
Don John of Austria rides homeward with a wreath. He sees across a weary land a straggling road in Spain, up which a lean and foolish knight forever rides in vain.
And he smiles,
but not
as Sultan's smile,
and settles back the blade. But Don John of Austria rides homeward from the crusade.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Cervantes, who died April 23rd. In fact, he died the exact same day that Shakespeare died. How cool is that? Cervantes lived the most romantic knightly life that you could imagine. Captured, kidnapped, held for ransom, escaped, fought in the Battle of Lepanto, was wounded so badly he could not use his hand for the rest of his life, but with his other hand went back to Spain and penned Don Quixote, which is about a foolish knight and makes fun of chivalry and says that the romantic life and the adventurous life is not possible after having lived it out himself. He makes fun of it, but the only reason you can make fun of it is because it's true. You can only laugh at the true things. Chesterton says the test of a good religion is whether we can laugh at it. Does Islam meet the test? I don't know. Maybe it does. But the evil romance, the opposite of the real romance, the evil romance puts a different motivation and a different source to our actions. It has given a soul to our race for wealth, and our worship of success is based on a false history, which pretends that Christendom was built by lawbreakers and not lawgivers, by robbery, not by chivalry, by pirates and not by priests. The worth of a civilization depends on which God it worships. And there was the great Roman civilization, the pre-Christian Roman civilization, that even though it was fighting with its own decline, recognized that there was a civilization that was more decadent than their own. A civilization that had great wealth and culture and art and high learning, but it threw its babies into a furnace to worship their god, Moloch. It sounds like the name of a god who eats babies, Moloch. And the Romans said Carthage must be destroyed, and they destroyed it. But Chesterton says in the 20th century, prophetically, Moloch is not fallen. Moloch is still in his high place, and his furnaces consume mankind. His armies overrun the earth. His ships threaten our land. The question on the lips of any living man is whether those who burn their children shall conquer those who don't. The parallel is quite justifiable. What we are fighting has all the regularity of a horrible religion. We are not at war with regrettable incidents or sad exceptions, but with a system like the system of sacrificing babies, a system of drowning neutrals, a system of enslaving civilians, a system of attacking hospitals, a system of exterminating chivalry. We are fighting against the odds. That's what chivalry does. It fights against the odds. And we always cheer on the underdog. We always side with the underdog because it's something we can't even explain. It's a combination of pity and dramatic surprise, a desire for justice, a delight in the indeterminate, the things that we don't know what's going to happen. And it could be a lost cause, except as Christians, we do not believe there are any lost causes. We do not admit that there are any hopeless loyalties. We should come back to our religion at last if its temples were deserted as Stonehenge. It is this splendor of the hopeless hope, sometimes called the forlorn hope, which has made the peculiar chivalry of Christendom, which has given to us alone the true idea of romance. For the real romance was a combination of fidelity to the quest as a task with perpetual and enormous inequality to the task. Fidelity to the task and inequality to the task. Fidelity is the princess, inequality is the dragon. But we fight to defeat the dragon because we love the princess. And we don't give up. We don't give up. In conclusion, which of course are the best words in any talk. It gives you hope. Just when you're about to give up hope, you hear in conclusion, and you sit up. And yes, there is hope. I'd like to just quickly explain the title of this talk, because I think it's time that we do that. Night of the Holy Ghost. This was a title given to G.K. Chesterton. The poet Walter de la Mare wrote 4 lines of poetry that appeared on Chesterton's prayer card when he died. Night of the Holy Ghost, he goes his way. Wisdom his motley, truth his loving jest. The mills of Satan keep his lance in play. Pity and innocence his heart at rest. Chesterton is a knight, and he's still at battle. He's still paradoxical. His apparent foolishness is actually wisdom. His joke is actually the truth. The devil doesn't get the joke. The dragon can't be taken seriously. But Chesterton's heart is at rest because he's compassionate and pure. And his very first book of poetry, called The Wild Knight, describes the kind of knight that Chesterton is. I ride forever, seeking after God. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, President Alquist. We have time for questions, so please raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you.
There's one back there.
Thank you very much, President Alquist. So, you said that in every romance there's a St. George, a princess, and a dragon. And you also said that I believe that we are called to return back to our religion, back to God. And so I was wondering, in our romance with God, are we the St. George? Are we the princess? Are we both? And how do we act chivalrously in that relationship?
Well, I'm going to say we are not the dragon.
Thank goodness.
But yeah, we are supposed to be St. George in this battle. We are the ones who fight and love. We are, we're protecting the thing we love and trying to preserve the thing we love, and we're trying to destroy the thing that's trying to destroy it. And that works at many different levels, metaphysically and physically, literary and symbolically. It's absolutely a metaphor that works and works. You see it in literature, you see it in the movies, but you see it in theology too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It seems like you're saying that chivalry is very comedic, whether you see that in Sir Gawain or other stories. I was wondering if there are any tragic characters that are actually chivalrous, because it seems like for a while Othello and Desdemona have a beautiful relationship, and then that doesn't work out very well. Or Hamlet and Ophelia cannot eventually resolve anything. So is this inherently comedic thing ever to be found in tragedies? Are Hamlet and Othello really chivalrous?
Well, Chesterton's actual line is that wherever you have courtesy, you have comedy. There's things that you can laugh at, but the whole idea of comedy and tragedy is that tragedy is tragedy. It's that point where we can do no more. That none of our solutions work, and comedy is stepping back with enough intellectual detachment to be able to laugh at it, whereas our hearts are telling us to cry at it. And Chester says that's actually the balance of sanity itself. The sane man has comedy in his head and tragedy in his heart, and you keep those two in balance, and that's what keeps us sane. We have to always remain compassionate, but we also have to always remain just a little bit intellectually detached so that we don't go crazy. And so in a comedy, in a tragedy such as Hamlet or Macbeth or Othello, there's always going to be a little salt of flavoring of comedy in there. So there's something you can laugh at that gives that comic relief, the classic dramatic comic relief. There's elements of Iago in Othello, he's ridiculous. He's ridiculous how evil he is, but you can almost laugh at how evil he is. And that's the point about the dragon. Don't take the dragon too seriously. He's ridiculous. And and Macbeth, of course, you have the drunken porter, and Hamlet is very witty, very witty. But it is a tragedy. It is a tragedy. But ultimately, he says the comedy of man defeats the tragedy of man.
Thank you very much for your talk, President Alquist. I'm just wondering, the examples you gave, Adam neglected to be chivalrous, and St. George is this sort of epitome of chivalrousness. What is the role of women in this idea of the virtue of chivalry?
So this came up earlier today when we were talking about you girls up on the mountain during your freshman year, how when you didn't have men around, you had to just do it all yourselves, and of course you were awesome. When the men weren't there to take care of you, you had to do it. That's Chesterton says women are always able to do what men can do when the men don't do it. And the problem with feminism is that it's women wanting to be men when they forgot the great feminine role they play, which is to be mothers, the one thing that men can't do. And he says, so feminism is always an attack on motherhood, but the whole idea is that women are not only equal to men, they're usually superior, they're usually better than men at most things, but they're the ones who keep men civilized, which is also demonstrated by the freshman men on the mountain. How when there are no women around, they're pretty much picking fleas off of each other and eating them. That's about as civilized as they get. And so the role of women is a distinct role from the role of men, but within that world, women have to also protect what is weak, which would be children, and fight the dragon, which is everything that is going to destroy a child.
Thank you for the lecture. I was wondering if you'd be willing to say a little bit more on Cervantes and Don Quixote, because maybe I'm reading the book wrong. But when I read it, I really feel like Cervantes considers this completely ridiculous, right? I'm thinking of one passage where Don Quixote comes up to a boy who's being whipped. He threatens the guy whipping him, and then he leaves thinking he's solved everything, and the boy just gets whipped even worse, right? Where it's like this idea of chivalry seems like maybe you think you're leaving the world a better place, but actually at this point, maybe it was good at one point, but at the point we're at,
great conflict. But the main point is the relationship between Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, that innocence should always lead wisdom. And that's the theme of the story. The innocent goes first and the wisdom follows that. And the wisdom will protect and take care of innocence, but wisdom's not the leader, innocence is. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, good.
Thank you very much for the lecture, President Alquist. So when we embody like the chivalrous knight, we all think of like someone properly formed in mind, body, and spirit. Clearly strong and courageous. But you also use the image of Chesterton as a kind of like chivalrous knight. So I'm wondering, someone who may not have been the most well physically trained, let's be honest, do you think that like that physical prowess and strength is essential to being like truly chivalrous, or is that something that's not necessarily like needed?
Yeah, I think Chesterton does praise the physical, the necessariness of the soldier being able to fight physically, and he was aware of his own deficiencies in that regard, of course. But still, he's in this case, while not bodily the type of Don Quixote, he certainly is the idealist in realizing that, yeah, the knight has to be able to physically back up his stance in protecting the truth and doing what's right and fighting against the odds. But yeah, you need some physical strength to do that. But it's clear, though, that the knight is still the underdog, that it still looks like what he's fighting is going to be worse than he is. And so, yeah, the physicality helps, but that's not what's going to win. It's going to be the whole combination of things.
Thank you.
It's a great question, though.
Thank you very much for your lecture. There's an old saying that it involves a knight in shining armor. And I was wondering, given your very recent comment about innocence, that knight in shining armor has never had a battle. And I was wondering, innocence versus experience, would it be more fruitful to have battled the dragon, perhaps, before you encounter it further? Or
Okay, I didn't quite get the question. So the knight in shining armor You said it's
Yes, the knight in shining armor has never met a fight.
has never met
A fight.
a fight.
A battle against
because
the
of the
dragon.
fact that his armor is shining. Well, no, yeah. If he's still wearing shining armor, yeah, at that point he hasn't had the fight. But once he's in the fight, then he gets some stains and some fingerprints and possibly blood on his armor. But you can also shine it up again to be ready for the next battle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Without practically, just creating a program or something like that, how does one put chivalry into their own life? Or is it something that's kind of a journey just followed after by talking about those ideals that you were speaking of earlier?
Well, let's go back to Chesterton's definition, which he claimed it was hard to define. But the elements, he said, a reverence for weakness. We can find lots of ways to put that into our life to protect the weak. And, women and children first. That's where it starts. But the physically handicapped, the mentally handicapped, and Chesterton says the morally handicapped. He says we should feel as sorry for the morally homeless as we are for the physically homeless, because they just don't know where the truth is. We have a duty to protect them and give them a moral shelter under which to dwell. He called it Christian courage. There's always elements for courage. And, putting courage to work is living out the gospel paradox of, laying your life down in order to gain it. We have to risk everything when we're courageous, but then we gain everything by being courageous. And then he also talked about a disdain of death. Why should we be afraid of death? And acting as if we are afraid of something as paltry as death shows that we're not putting this into practice ourselves. He says martyrs are always joyful. There's no one who's a reluctant martyr. They're not martyrs if they are. And then, he says the moral attitude of the man whose back is against the wall. We're in a society right now where almost no one is on our side. But you know what? Also, everyone's starting to recognize what we're doing. We're making a difference. Even in Lander, Wyoming, there's a ripple effect coming from here that is being felt all around the country. In all these classical Catholic schools, a ripple effect is being made. Everything we win, we have to win at the local level, and that's how we change the culture.
Does Chesterton ever engage with any medieval criticism of chivalry?
Oh, yeah, he does. There was a writer named J.J. Sankstrom, and he claimed that Chesterton's view of medieval times were totally romantic and totally unconnected to the actual truth of the medieval times. And they had not only an oral debate together, but they kept it going as a written debate, and it was going to be a book-length argument, but Chesterton died before it was completed. But we have, the first third of it is written. Stokes, J.J. Stokes or Skokes or, yeah. But he did. So he took on the very non-romantic view of chivalry of the Middle Ages as being really a high point of Catholic civilization, where there was not only great order, but great art and great liturgy to go with it, and well-formed minds, and everyone in the society benefited from it.
What I'm wondering is that in that society of well-formed minds and high art and culture, we find pretty serious critiques of chivalry itself. So, for example, a previous question had mentioned Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which has built into it, it has a knight, of course, but it has a pretty serious critique of chivalry, and we find critiques of chivalry in Chaucer, in Shakespeare. It's sort of rife in the medieval tradition itself, and I'm just curious if Chesterton knew that, and he ever wrestled with that fact? Or
Yeah, well, he talks about all those things. You know, he talks about Chaucer and Sir Gawain, but in most cases, these are knights who don't live up to the chivalric ideal. It's not that the chivalry was bad; it's that the way they lived and their misbehavior that was bad, or something that sometimes they did something rash that was not in keeping with the ideal of courage and protecting the weak and protecting virtue. It's only when they fail in virtue that they fail. I think that would be his ongoing commentary on that. Again, it's how the big test of chivalry is how the knight behaves when he fails. Does he come back from that, and does he do his penance and end up victorious, or does he continue to justify a bad action and end badly as a result? That's going to be the moral tale that's told. It's a good question. There's one back there, one over there. There's two there. There's one there. Great.
Thank you very much for your lecture. You said that to be chivalrous is to have respect for the weak. And you also said that women can do everything better than men. So in what way, for a man, is a woman an occasion to act chivalrous?
One more time, the last question was what the last thing you asked, could you repeat your last question?
Oh, sorry.
He's looking around. Did someone ask a question? Yeah, it was you who asked the question. Just repeat the last question, yeah.
Yes, so I'll just repeat everything I said, which was that you said that to be chivalrous is to have respect
for the weak, but women can do more than men, and then you asked a question.
Yes, and the question was then, in what way or why would a woman be an occasion for a man to act chivalrous if they don't seem to be much weaker than men?
Yeah, so the time when the woman has to act like a man is when the man isn't acting like a man. That's when the woman is forced to act like a man, or when the man is not present. But when men and women are playing their right roles, then the man is protecting the woman, and then she can do what she's supposed to do, which is to protect the child and form the child. And she's superior in many ways, but she's most superior in the fact that she has the greatest influence on all of mankind when she forms the child. And that place has to be protected by the man, so she can do that.
Thank you. Could you say a few more words about how horsemanship fosters chivalry?
Yeah, so the horse is this creature of beauty, but it's a wild thing that has been tamed, and it then serves man. So it's beautiful, it's strong, it's wild, but it has been tamed. And when tamed, it becomes this companion of man. It's still beautiful and strong, and so it helps protect the weak because the man has trained it to do that. It helps the man fight because the man has trained him to do that. So the horse is the extension of the man. It's the part of man that wags his tail.
Thank you, sir. I was wondering if you could speak more to the idea of the need to laugh at evil or not take it too seriously. I'm thinking of like Milton's Satan as an example, who at times does seem very laughable, but also brings up concepts that are very serious, and at times the readers may be even tempted to think that Satan acts heroically or is a hero of Paradise Lost. So I was wondering if you could speak more to what Chesterton says.
Chesterton has some very uncomplimentary things to say about John Milton. But President Washout, you're going to have to invite me back to talk about Chesterton on Milton, something I will gladly do. So we're not going to go all the way there, but we will say that Chesterton's point about evil is that evil is always the ape of God. The devil's always the ape of God. He's trying to mimic God and deceive us. But we do realize that being an ape, he's a monkey, and we can laugh at that. We can laugh at his tactics. But it demands both faith on our part, and it demands chivalry on our part, which is self-control. If we have the strength of faith, if we have the full armor of salvation, the knight's armor of salvation, we don't have to be afraid of anything the devil throws at us. In fact, we can laugh at his tactics. And that gives us one of the characteristics of the knight is he's able to laugh. He'll hate what's cruel, but he'll laugh at evil. It's ridiculous, and what you do with the ridiculous is you ridicule it. And all the things that Satan hates are the things that we do the best when we do them right. We love, we act with sacrifice, we act with joy, we act with peace and certitude. All Satan could do is doubt and hate and everything that undermines the virtues. So we have to laugh at the unvirtuous and not take it seriously.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I wanted to try and rephrase Joe McAleer's question from earlier because it sounded very interesting. So the idea of the knight in shining armor is that he hasn't gone into battle yet and that he's innocent. And you mentioned that innocence is necessary for chivalry, but that implies that the one who's chivalrous has no experience. And so then what is the role, or is there any role in experience for chivalry? Because it seems like it would be important to know how to fight.
Yeah. So I think Chester points out the common misunderstanding that innocence is not experienced. That is a fallacy. Innocence can be experienced. We always think that innocence has to be tainted in order to be wise. Now, wisdom and innocence can go together in the same person. The person who hasn't been tainted can actually be more wise than the person who has only his mistakes to learn from. Virtue makes us smart. Sin makes us stupid. And that's the point about innocence. And so innocence can fight, and it can get its armor dirty, but it's never a permanent stain. It will reshine the armor, and he'll still be the knight in shining armor, which is how I was trying to answer your question. I hope it's a little more satisfactory now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Does Chesterton speak at all about how both men and women can use chivalry with spiritual warfare?
Yeah, well, I would say that that's kind of what we've been talking about here, because really all physical warfare is also spiritual warfare. Every political question, says Chesterton, is a religious question. Anytime we're trying to bring justice to the civil world, we're trying to bring the truth of Christ and embody that in the Civil War. So it's always a spiritual warfare. So I think, Chesterton very much reflects St. Paul, and I'm pretty sure he quotes him at one point saying, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against principality and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. And that's the armor of God that we need to put on. But none of that spiritual armor has any meaning unless we understand what the physical armor is used for as well. But every physical fight is only a symbol of a spiritual fight.
Thank you, President Alquist. I guess you said that you need to also take yourself lightly, and I think that's something that a lot of us kind of struggle to do. Sometimes it's even more easy to take the devil less seriously, but ourselves, I don't know, we're closer to ourselves, so it's easier to take ourselves seriously. So, how do you take yourself more lightly, I guess. That's my question.
Well, we start by honoring the first commandment. If we give our glory and worship and praise to God, then we're not giving it to ourselves. And we can only worship the thing that's bigger than us. So we need to make ourselves smaller than God. And every time we do that, we're taking ourselves less seriously. It's the answer to all the questions. Follow the 10 Commandments, Jack.
Thank you. I was wondering, in your studies of Chesterton and also of medieval chivalry, if you find any particular institution or practice or skill building from that era for boys that you feel would be beneficial to revitalize in some manner today to raise a chivalrous generation.
Well, I know that Chesterton had a particular affection for the guild in general, a community of craftsmen that worked together and established a skill, whatever that one would be, but they did it as a community. And that approach to a group of people working together and helping each other develop a particular skill is what built the cathedrals. And we could start doing beautiful things again if we had that mentality of learning the skill and passing that skill to the next generation, but doing it as a community of people. And the guild's been also had a certain respect for equality. It wasn't competition. It was always cooperation. And the reason they did such beautiful things is because they loved the world. And he says, if you love the world, you'll make the world beautiful. If you hate the world, you will actually make an ugly world. And if we look at the architecture of the last few generations, these are people who hate mankind, who build those ugly buildings. But fortunately, a lot of them are empty and we can put colleges in them.
So my question is kind of related to Julian's question. You said that we are supposed to you said that you can only laugh at true things, but then you also said that we are supposed to laugh laugh at the devil, which, I mean, yes, the devil exists, but could you say a few words?
I'm laughing at you right now. What do you think about that?
Reconciling the two.
I sat with her at Sinks today for an hour and a half, and she still's asking me questions here. Still trying to trip me up here. Now, so we can only use parody or the art of satire or making fun of something if there's a real thing to make fun of. All right, you can't have satire or parody unless it's attached to something. There has to be an ideal to make fun of, and if that ideal fails, that's what we end up making fun of. But what we do with the devil in ridiculing him is we're ridiculing his poor attempt to be the truth. Yeah. There's one right there.
Thank you very much. I had a question about, you talked a little bit about the degradation of chivalry and how people aren't chivalrous anymore, but what would you say about the people who think they're chivalrous? Like, I'm thinking of I think what we call a savior complex or something, where somebody believes that they're the hero or they're the chivalrous person when they don't actually have virtue. How would you combat that, I guess, or what would you have to say against that?
Yeah, so that's sort of like a case of madness, as it were. It's a mental disconnection from reality. And Chesterton talks about this in his book Orthodoxy, where there's the chapter called The Madman and the chapter called the Insanity, the Suicide of Thought. And And so bad thinking is self-destructive. And so what you try to do is point out how the logical conclusion of their actions will not only end in madness, but will actually destroy them. It'll be a self-destructive madness. But you have to get them to be as detached as possible in order to look at themselves. That's Chesterton's ongoing technique with madness, is to get the madman to see himself as he really is and somehow snap out of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're sure welcome.
You mentioned something along the lines
And it was
of,
good, too. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Andrew.
I appreciate that.
All right, okay.
You said something along the lines of the root of all the economic theories are barbarism.
Yeah.
And that chivalry is kind of rooting for the underdog. And economic thought is something that Chesterton and his friend Hilaire Belloc spoke and wrote a lot about. How do you see something like distributism in the context of the two great kind of like just greed and corporatism and just kind of rampant capitalism versus kind of a statism and socialism and communism and all that as kind of the underdog? And is there a chivalry there in trying to create a more beautiful, just ordering in society that acknowledges reality?
Yeah, certainly distributors would be a perfect underdog against the twin monsters of socialism and rampant capitalism. And that both socialism and capitalism are purely materialist theories, and they are barbarism because they're based only on appetite. They're both based on the search for scarce goods, a purely physical motivation. There's nothing spiritual or elevating in the basis of their theories. And Chesterton argues that essentially they end up being the same. They end up being either you have a few people who control all the capital or the government controls all the capital, but in both cases, all the rest of us are wage slaves working for them. And the idea of distributism is that instead of being slaves at all, we are owners. We each have some capital and we are independent of Hudge or Gudge. And Chester says the opposite of employment is not unemployment. The opposite of employment is independence. And that's the ideal, that each knight has his own horse and his own land, and no one owns him or controls him. But then he protects his family, and then he's part of a community that all are protecting the same thing. And that's chivalry. It's a selfless act.
Thank you.
Good question.
This will be our last question.
Thank you. I'm really interested.
You understand this is the last question now, so it has to be really good.
I'm under pressure now.
Or either that or my answer has to be really good. So make it an easy question. No, make it a hard one. And then we'll try to either end with the question or I'll have a good answer. Okay, so go ahead, ask your question now. Don't let me interrupt.
Sounds good. I'm very interested in this idea you brought up about comedy and tragedy and sort of the relation to the chivalrous man, particularly what you said in response to Florian's question, which is that you need to have a dynamic where you hold comedy in your head and tragedy in your heart simultaneously. I guess I had a bunch of questions about that, mostly just trying to see exactly what you mean. So what does it mean to have comedy and tragedy in your head, comedy in your head and tragedy in your heart? How is that possible? Because they seem somewhat mutually exclusive. What would that look like? I guess maybe in literature or the Bible. And how does that all sort of tie back to chivalry?
Okay, that's not a bad question. So, because we're getting to the principal rhetorical device of Chesterton, which is paradox, which is not merely a rhetorical device, but Chesterton claims it's the basis of all truth. All truth is a paradox. The ultimate truth is Jesus Christ, fully God, fully man. You can't reconcile those two unless it has a knot in the middle that attaches them. So just like fate and free will have to exist together, because if it's just one or the other, that's a recipe for madness. If it's all fate, then why do we bother talking about it? Why do we say, please pass the salt? But if it's all free will and there's no God, no all-powerful God, then again, why does it matter that we say, please pass the salt? Because ultimately we're not accountable to anything larger than ourselves. Well, we have to remain sane. The sane man believes in both those things at the same time. But he also has to understand that both laughter and tears are both necessary. But we do have to realize that laughter is more important than tears. That we can't let the tears overwhelm the laughter. We cannot lose our compassion. We always have to have this deep and tragic love for those who suffer. But neither can we ever lose enough intellectual detachment that we can realize it's funny and it's also temporary. That we're going to have an eternal reconciliation where not only does the suffering end and our questions are answered, but we get to do what we were made to do, which is to worship God. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't let that be the last question. We have time to mob our speaker as we get refreshments, as we allow him to have refreshments. So please join us for refreshments and continued conversation.